Ke tau tangata tapu hea tua. Poto mai ke puampuangi hopi a te tau Fakalofa.
At the going of the sun and in the morning, I request the public to repeat. We will remember them.
How sad those lives were given. But be that as it may, these are some of the reasons why we're here.
It is a privilege to be here in Niue with you this morning, to share this day with you all as we come to reflect on what the spirit of Anzac means to each and every one of us.
Kai mua atu kia tau tolu, e tau holonga, e tau toa ha tau tolu ni watu ai, ke tau whakamua e laurolangi. Warokole atu kia tau tolu osi.
I think it's important because for us to understand that we wouldn't be living the lives we do today if it wasn't for the sacrifices made for us, especially by the 150 men that sacrificed their lives for our freedom.
The main reason why we commemorate Anzac is to remember our ancestors, or our motos, who left our island to fight in the First World War. But as a young person, I think it's also important that the younger people on our island remember Anzac because of the sacrifice our ancestors made. So it's important for the younger generations to remember their sacrifice. But the other key thing to remember is it's up to us, the younger generations, to carry on this tradition, because Anzac is like a tradition for us. It's a part of our history. But the only way we could do that is for all youth to participate in all Anzac activities. Yeah.
It's important for young people to commemorate Anzac because it's a big part of what we have come to establish today. As young people, we need to have that deeper understanding and appreciation, actually, to the sacrifice that our people made back in 1915. It's important because we have built a strong number and foundation in commemorating annually our fallen soldiers who selflessly gave or sacrificed or enlisted, not knowing what they were getting into. It's important for us to remember that and for us to actually reflect on it, and also to reflect that as young people now, that could have easily been us, been placed into their shoes. And just having that sense of the value of respect, understanding.
Maringale ke whakaliliwhia koutou. Hako e tau matotu puna ni o ke whilakutaki mai mawhale laulolangi.
It's really important for us because in my generation there hasn't been a world war, but that's not to say that it is so important for us to think and realise the sacrifices that were made. I think for service, people that have been in the services, the children have an idea of the sacrifice that was made. So it's significant for us that haven't remember.
For me, it's important because you can't understand the present if you don't understand the past. Something I did my degree in history. We studied World War I and World War II through school and through university, but that was a history that was taught almost exclusively through a British lens. We didn't learn history and the history of the two wars through a Pacific lens. So I think it's really important now, and our Foreign Minister, Nanaia Mahuta, commented on a video recently around the opening of the Pacific Islands Memorial, that New Zealand doesn't talk about the Pacific history as well as we should. It's important so that we understand why we have freedoms today, why we have the choices that we have today, why you and I can be sitting in a room having this conversation today. It's on the back of the sacrifice and the service of all of the people that have come before us.
First, I feel proud. Second, I feel sad. And thirdly, this is just from my own opinion, I'm a bit curious as well. So first of all, I'm proud that our 150 Niuean soldiers left our shores. It distinguished us from the other islands around the Pacific, and it tells a story about us Niueans to the rest of the world. I'm also honoured, and because I have two namesakes who went to the First World War. Private Taveli Pavihi was part of the 150 Niuean soldiers, and Private Albert Guildford Godsmark, who was in the New Zealand regiment. So I'm honoured to have two names, namesakes of the two soldiers who attended the First World War. Saddened because our 150 soldiers left our shores with no knowledge of warfare, no knowledge of the outside world, so pretty much they just up and left their sacrifice to ensure that the safety of their families and the island of Niue. And I'm curious as well, because they would have been about my age right by now when they enlisted. So I just wanted to know what was going through their heads when they were going to enlist to the First World War without any knowledge of the outside world, without any knowledge of warfare. So just curious on that part.
Tole Fakalofa mo ilio manamanatu ke la tolu ni oke mai e motu me mangava.
Very sad. In a way, when you look at it, 150 men, it's a very significant number. And when you also think about it, 150 men could easily be our whole high school population. And to put it that way, that's a massive chunk of our population right now. Sad in a way that they enlisted not knowing, well, we can't assume that they didn't know, but not knowing the conditions that they were getting themselves into, unaware of many things, unexposed to many things. I think in a way some of them took this as a way of getting away from the island. I mean, not in a bad way, but doing so, they are not fully understanding what it really is they're going to do.
It's humbling to know that we had men who were willing to fight for our country, and it's also inspiring knowing that they were just ordinary people and they had ordinary lives, and they could have chosen to say no, but they did decide to go and sacrifice their lives for us. And it made me realize that anyone can have the capability to do anything great, especially if it was for your country and to represent your family and for yourself as well.
It's a really interesting question, and it's something that I've given more thought to since I came up here, and as I was preparing to come up to Niue and read the history of the men who went across to Europe and to North Africa. For a New Zealander, we felt the war was a long way away. So for a Niuean, I can't imagine how much further it could even have seemed to go from this island down to New Zealand for training, which in itself was Niue and then across to North Africa and Europe. And that was an incredibly brave decision for those people to take, to go into the unknown, probably know not at all what they were going into. People talk about the courage and the respect that we have for the men that went. It's incredible, especially for the families that were left behind as well, to also not know where their men were going or whether they would actually return.
Whai whakakoanga whakakainau ne moa mai ai kai manako au ke iloa laulahi whoki. Mauinga lai ke whai whakakoanga ke tala tū whakaolo.
I think we are being taught enough about our history. As for me, I have been seeing and doing. So every 25th of April, we commemorate the 150 men that went to war for our ancestors, and we remember them, to make sure we remember them.
Growing up, I was brought up with the importance of Anzac due to being direct descendants of the soldiers. But I think also, even if we weren't direct descendants, I think my dad would have still instilled in us the importance of the day and having us annually attend the dawn parades. Also goes for active girls and boys brigade members, having be a part of the dawn parades annually and having them be actually one of the major parts of the parade. They grow up attending the dawn parades, and as they grow older, they start to actually listen to what's being said at the parade, listening to all the names, listening to the guest speakers, and having touched base on the importance of Anzac Day. So growing up attending it, they will develop a deeper understanding of why we commemorate Anzac.
I guess my knowledge about Anzac, or about our 150 Niuean soldiers, I would say it's above average. We do have topics like that when I was in high school, Anzac, topics about 150 Niuean soldiers. We did touch base on those type of topics, but the ones that stuck to me was the stories being told at the Anzac commemorations. So I remember when I was still a young boy, still to this day, I remember my grandfather, Kyra Poihega, would take me to all the Anzac commemorations, and then the stories they'll tell. Those are the ones that stuck to me, and that's why I kind of built up my knowledge of Anzac, kind of built up my knowledge of the 150 Niuean soldiers. So that's why I said it's important for us younger generations to remember Anzac, because you learn a lot from those Anzac commemorations. So from there, that's where my knowledge grew about Anzac, about 150 Niuean soldiers. Just the different stories from different people that come overseas and share their stories. So in a way, yes, we do get taught, the younger generations, if it's through school, if it's through family members or family stories, or just like myself, just attending Anzac commemorations, just to listen and observe. But from a personal point of view, I guess, we are being taught. It's just up to the individual to, to accept and to be interested in the knowledge being shared around about our 150 Niuean soldiers.
We learn a little bit about some of the history of war. We learned, for example, we grow up knowing about Guadalcanal, but we don't grow up knowing that 150 men and 45 Cook Islanders in the initial phases went off to World War I with New Zealand and with the Empire. It's something when I went to Tonga, I wasn't aware of the number of the history of Tonga's commitments to war. So I think there is a huge amount more that we can understand about the Pacific if we understand the contributions that the Pacific has made to global freedom and regional freedom as well. Even issues such as learning about the peacekeeping missions, for example, or in Solomon Islands. That's not something that we talk about in school, but it's an incredibly important part of our regional history.
speaking from experience, I grew up in a family always attending the annual Anzac parade. So what we've been doing right now is taking that and going along with it with my nieces and nephews, the younger generation in our family. We have also made it a tradition to always take them to the dawn parade. So my eldest niece here in the island, she's 9 years old. She has been attending the Anzac 9 years straight. And just this year, she's like, why do we always go here? And I'm like, Payson, this is why we take you. This is for you to develop an understanding, to listen, to take it in, to go through how we learn. So I think it's important in a way that doing things like this, it incorporates into their sense of understanding. It's a way for them to learn. And just going every year, they learn something new. They hear something new. They understand something better. And it gradually, their knowledge gradually picks up from where it was the last time. In school, it can also be practiced in school. We see a lot of cultural performances right now. It can be incorporated into a lot of the cultural performances right now. And there's many ways, but it depends on the families and the older role models to try and see how they can use the war and the Anzac, the 150, the old history, and see how they can incorporate into their teachings as role models, as teachers, as parents, as aunties.
I remember when I was around 9 years old, my little brother used to ask my dad about why do wars start, and I remember he told him that wars start by differences in opinions. As the next generation, I think it's worth investing our time to find common ground and to remember the sacrifices that were made for us.
Whalua whakakoanga mai hakoe koutu moi mui whekawhekau. Whake tau malolo tau mga ho moi whekawhekau mai mitake mga wha manga moi koutu.
We need to teach our younger generations about the sacrifice, our brave 150 Niue soldiers, their sacrifice. We need to take pride in their sacrifice, because if it wasn't for their sacrifice, who knows where we would be today. They also paved the way for us Niueans around the world. So we need to teach the younger generations that their forefathers or their ancestors or matos, their sacrifice kind of paved the way for who we are today. And we need to teach them to accept their sacrifices. For myself, Anzac is a tradition, and it's a part of our culture. So we need to take pride in our culture, in our traditions, and we need to keep Anzac going for the future generations, so we can remember the sacrifices that our brave 150 Niuean soldiers did for us. That would be the most important lessons we could teach for the younger generations.
I think this year the New Zealand Defence Force and the RSA had a phrase or some phrases around this, which was Fakalofa, leo ono kitua manatu, which was honour, respect and remember. I think that's the key lesson that we need to remember, just that we should not forget why people went to war, and we should not forget what we have today because of people going to war. The other aspect, I think, is that it's not history. Anzac began in 1915, obviously, but we currently have Niueans serving with the New Zealand Defence Force who are serving in very difficult roles and contributing to peace just as much as they were today as they were in the years gone by.
I feel that it must have been really scary to have a son or a brother or a father who would leave and you wouldn't know if they would come back. And it's really scary.
That's another thing I was curious, because how will their families feel? So that's why I'm also saddened by the fact that, you know, their sons, their fathers, their uncles, their cousins, nephews, they just up and left, you know. So I want to know what was going through their head and how their family was going to react on how they're just going to let go of their sons, their fathers, and just to the outside world. So with no means of communication, there's nothing back then. So I guess that's why I'm saddened as well. I want to know what they were thinking. So that's another thing I want to learn as well. Because most of the stories that I did learn from the Anzac commemorations was just based on the 150 Niue soldiers. But if I could remember properly, they didn't really touch base about the families that were left behind. So I guess that's another important lesson that we could maybe look into, just to find the stories of the families that were left behind. That will be pretty interesting, and I'm pretty sure quite a few people will be keen on hearing their stories as well.
4 brothers went, 2 returned. My direct descendant, Kyra HIpa, he married a beautiful woman, Sifa. They only had 1 child, Losa, and he returned. It was said that he was, let's say, traumatized from what they had to endure, to climate, to the diseases, to being exposed to all those exogenous factors. It took a toll on him. That it was said that he went out fishing on the canoe and he never returned. So what they said back then was that he went in search of his 2 brothers who died at sea and had to be buried out at sea. So that's what it said, eh? Well, that's what our descendants passed down onto us. But as a ripple effect, they only had 1 daughter. That's probably due to him departing so early, having that what could have been more was cut short. Having 4 of them go, 2 of them returning, of course it's going to affect them some way. And just seeing other soldiers going through that same thing as well, and hearing other direct descendant stories and comparing it, like it all affected the line in some way, and I think that's also an important thing to remember. Like there is a ripple effect, there is an impact closer or further down the line that we have to be aware of.
I really think it was amazing that when I listened to the stories, because I understand that maybe 1 or 2 of them were not of age when they decided they wanted to go. But I think it's amazing, and I look now at Anzac, when we have Anzac commemorations, how proud the families are. And they wear their medals with pride, and it's really amazing to see.
It must have been huge for Niue. I see now that some families had as many as 4 members, 4 men that went. In New Zealand, we also had a huge number of men that volunteered in the First World War and left. The impacts on those small communities was also extreme, especially the huge numbers that didn't return. Also, when they did return, where they may have had injuries from the war or illnesses, which of course was such a big issue for the Niuean men. So it wasn't just the 4 years of the war, it was the ongoing impacts. There was also, I guess, probably the difficulties for the people that chose not to go, which was equally as valid and probably equally as courageous to not go, and then for the community to have to come to terms with that itself as well. So the impact must have been significant. For the women and children left behind, having to run the bush farms, keep the bush gardens going, keep the food going, and again with so little communication, which is probably something that we as the current generation find difficult to imagine, just not knowing whether anyone was coming home.
Hākua whalata me au nei, ka kano ni hākua au ta matuwhiwhine ne matutaki ki he hākua wahawhata ki inusila. Si koe ngā hua hākua nei whanuki ai, he monga whakapā koe ngā hua he Royal New Zealand Navy. Mō e au e whalua ngā hua ne lango ki au koe writer. Si koe ngā hua ia, ne hoko au ki he tuaanga koe Chief Petty Officer Writer. E nā tūtaki au he mga hala taha hiwa whitu ua. Si waru e tau hāku ne ngā hua. When I joined, there was a reason that I joined the Navy, and that was I wanted to be in the police force. However, to join the police force, you had to be older. So I was advised to join the Royal New Zealand Navy, and then when I had done some experience with the Navy, I could join the police force. However, I enjoyed it in the Navy and stayed. So that was how I got to stay for a term of 8 years. When I think about it, it's a really good experience. I think for me, who's a shy Niuean girl, it helped me to get order in my life, and which is, you had things to do, and if you didn't get them done, you're in trouble. So, there was curfew, there was your uniform had to be just so, your shoes had to be shiny, there were stripes on your tops that had to be right. All these things, I think, was character building for me, and I was able to learn a lot of things being there. And I think it helped me as a person as I grew up. You don't get promoted because you've been there a long time. You actually have to do exams. Not only exams, you do physical tests, and that was interesting. You're also trained to be able to cope with disruption. If there are people arguing, if there's a fight breaks out, you are taught to be able to control these situations. So there were a lot of things that you learned. You also got to go out to sea. At that time, women weren't sea able. When I left the Navy, there was only one ship that would take women, and the ship had been specifically renovated so that women were able to go to sea. So when we went to sea, it was a big deal, and they do all sorts of things to make your day at sea special. And for training, you had to pass a fitness standard to be able to be promoted. When I left, I was eligible for a warrant officer, and that's the highest rank I could go. It's interesting to know that history and to be part of it. And I think it is special to Niue because not all the Pacific nations were involved. So I think that for us, it's significant, and I think we were quite forward in thinking at that time. And when I consider the other Pacific nations didn't get all involved, yes, I think Niue was forward thinking in that, being supportive to their queen. Whakawela ke e siana nei ni wa mai ke o ke moa ke whai manatu whakakisa ke lata moi Return Servicemen's Association. Manatu whoki he e tau whata taha se au lima o furun mei Niue ne whalataha atu hakua hea mei Putuwiki i Nusila ke maika whalua tau whata toa leka ha Niue ke whalataha ke he tau ia si pihia hakua tau manatu ka whakawe moi maika ke whakakise Chief Petty Officer Rupina Lelene Morrissey, service number T28721, whakawe lahi.
I think one of the important aspects of the New Zealand-Niue relationship is understanding that it's not just about New Zealand being over there and Niue being here. The countries are interconnected. We have a large community of Niuean descendants in Niue, but also in Australia increasingly as well now, so that Anzac connection carries right through the countries. For Niue, it's a small population here now, and it's incredibly important to continue the preservation of language, to keep the pride in the language and the culture, and to draw on those people, the Niueans in New Zealand, to help with that and to support that preservation of language. We've seen too the connections, but as I mentioned, between New Zealand and Niue through the New Zealand Defence Force. They remain current, and we saw Major Kerry Talauta speak on the video that's on our Facebook page about his Maori and Niuean ancestry and about both sides of the families going to war. So those are connections that we should celebrate and remember and just strive to keep as strong as possible. Whakalifu, liu ono ono ki toa, manatu.